Very recently, George Russell has said that he would cherish the chance to go head to head with Verstappen, probably in the same machinery on the same team, and to see if he could beat him. He says that Verstappen is the benchmark in F1, and that's the best way he can measure himself as a driver. Personally, I believe that actually George Russell is the only person who could be on a team with Verstappen and actually challenge him. I'm going to start off very quickly by talking about temperament. George Russell trolls people. He's very manipulative and very everything he does is for effect to get reactions over people. And most of the time, he's not he's not emotional. He doesn't react, and Verstappen does. And that's one of the buttons he can push with Verstappen. Verstappen's maturing though, and I have a feeling that might not really work. But nevertheless, Verstappen is a volatile person. George Russell is cold, almost mechanical. I wonder if he's a human being. He has all the affect of a human being, but I think most of the thing he's a machine. George Russell he's a different type of machine than Verstappen. What do I mean that he's a machine is that he's consistent. The way he drives, he's linear, predictable, and very, very analytical. On the other hand, Verstappen is intuitive, raw, volatile in temperament, but with the way he drives, it's not linear at all. It's asymmetric. He uses, like, especially when he goes into corners, V style, and it's adaptable so that he's always searching and adapting his driving style based on the conditions on the track. And he needs to do sim racing and needs to explore and needs to take time to figure out tracks. Whereas George Russell has a linear style of driving, which is consistent day in, day out, and doesn't change. So that when he's on the track, he has a consistent reference spot to deal with, to a reference point relative to things like telemetry and the conditions of the track. I mean, the actual the shape of the track, the layout of the track, so that since he has a consistent driving style, he's able to map out qualifying laps, maybe able to map out his races based on the way he drives in relation to the track. All of this, of course, given that he has a car that's pretty balanced and can accommodate his style. Now, when you see Verstappen in qualifying, which is what I'm actually going to focus on, I'm going to focus on how they would do as teammates in qualifying. So I'm going off track here, but what I want to argue is that Verstappen has more raw pace in qualifying. Leclerc and Norris are the best qualifiers for raw pace. But this consistency, going back to this consistency of George Russell with his driving style, with his studying of data and track conditions during a weekend when he's doing his free practices, and also relating it to data from the year before and other information that he's given. He takes all of this and assimilates it and creates models in his mind, maps on how to drive, how to do a one lap. And one of the greatest things he's able to do is to identify where there are breaking points or braking zones, especially ones that help his linear style of driving, where he can get an advantage over guys like Max and Norris and Leclerc, who have more raw pace and carry speed into corners. So he finds his deficits in braking zones that give him an advantage. And overall, knowing the conditions of a track, he maps out the most efficient way for him to go on the track. Now, all of this starts with that, unlike anybody else, consistently, George Russell, what you see him do in free practice one is going to be what you see him do throughout the whole weekend. He's able to do a couple of laps he's able to do a free practice one. With the way he drives linear, the way he drives is a very good way to test over a season consistently, because he drives the same way no matter what track he's on. Okay, he takes that data along with what the conditions of the track and other things, and studies a lot of things that are beyond my pay grade, math and data and everything, and then makes decisions on how to map out his qualifying lap. Verstappen, we've seen it before. It takes him up to FP3 before he even starts getting warmed up. Then by the time he gets to Q3, through his intuitive searching and feel, he adapts, and most of the time he gets lucky to get the right setup. Sometimes he doesn't. On the other hand, with George Russell's meticulous, linear, predictable, robotic, mechanical, consistent clockwork methodology, he gets the setup right, probably even before they get on the track. I'm serious. Or they might have to make some little bit of alterations after FP1. And therefore, he saves himself a lot of stress that Verstappen has to go through to be able to find out the setup for his car. And a lot of times, the team doesn't get it right. And sometimes they mess up. But then in other tracks, like Suzuka and something, they'll come up with a miracle. So if they were both on the same team, you would see that George Russell would be more consistent in qualifying, not in terms of beating Verstappen, but extracting the most out of the car for his driving style. Whereas Verstappen would be up and down and would probably get a good enough setup by the time Q3 comes so that he might be able to edge out Russell on most tracks. But he's living dangerously because to be able to maintain that year in, year out is very difficult. Whereas Russell knows that he can always rely on getting the most out of the car given his driving style. Whereas we know that Verstappen tries to get the most out of the car no matter what, but it's usually through a lot of insane things, going super fast into corners, getting it set up so that it's pointy, so that he can go through corners in a certain way, the way he drives, carrying tons of speed and just holding on through the corner, always at the edge of imbalance. And also throughout laps, Verstappen would have more propensity to have more mistakes, even if he does get a faster qualifying time than Russell. He'll make more mistakes and still go faster just because of his ability to feel grip and to push the car to the limits of adhesion. But it's not as pretty as what George Russell would do. And we also know that on low speed corners and on curbs and hairpins, Verstappen probably outdo Russell due to his ability to push a car to the limit of grip and have that pointy style and that V style and rotate and probably get a little bit more time than Russell. But when you now look at flowing corners and fast high speed corners, Russell might have a slight advantage given his driving style or be equal with Verstappen. So to cut it short, it would be very interesting to see them on the same team going over one lap. Once again, I think just Verstappen's raw ability and also his ability to adapt. And also lately, Verstappen's becoming more consistent, especially if he has a stable car. Because a lot of the problem is not just him, it's the car he has. The last 6 or 8 races this year, he was looking faster in free practice ones and free practice twos because the car was more stable. But nevertheless, I would say that because Russell has a sort of, I'm not going to call it generic, but he has a consistent driving form from track to track to track. It's almost to the point where it's rigid. He's not going to adapt his driving style. And he takes that into account with conditions from track to track to track and is able to find the right setup in free practice one and just go with it all the way to qualifying. And then once again, Verstappen, whose driver styling is asymmetrical, it's jarring, it's pointed, and everything else, is not going to have that consistency. So that's going to be a negative for him. And from what we're seeing now with Russell and Verstappen, if they were on the same team, Russell would actually be like a Prost, and Verstappen is Senna. Russell's the closest thing to Prost. You know, the engineer, the scientist, the guy who can get the exact setup, the guy who has symmetry, the guy whose form is always the same from track to track to track, race to race to race, qualifying to qualifying to qualifying. Okay, so that would be the thing. So it would be the professor versus the extra sensory perceptive saint. That's the best word I could use. Funny enough, even though it may not sound right, but Verstappen really is just identical to Senna, and Russell in a lot of ways is identical to Proust. But in some aspects, Russell is has even things that make him more like Schumacher, because Proust gets set up right and everything else, but Schumacher is a lot more obsessive and detailed and anal about small variables. And that's what Russell is very good at, very small variables, mapping races. Another person who's like that is Rosberg. So Russell has these aspects of Rosberg, Verstappen, no, Rosberg, Schumacher, and Proust. Proust, the professor, the analytical approach, consistency in driving form. Rosberg, high IQ, knowing how to set up differential and everything. Also mapping a race. Schumacher, mapping a race, setting up the car, everything else. I do think that Schumacher was a little bit more intuitive than Russell, but Schumacher was also obsessive about setups and things. So you would best believe that if Russell went head to head with Verstappen, he would be working very hard. Not to say that Verstappen isn't working very hard, but he would be working very hard on things like data interpretation, considering all kinds of variables, remembering races from before, and sticking to his consistent form. Verstappen is also just as obsessive, but Verstappen doesn't get into that analytical approach as much as Russell does. He's going to put in tons and tons of hours of sim racing. And when we say that Russell has a high IQ, maybe higher than Verstappen, we have to remember Verstappen's racing IQ also is fantastically high. It's just that it's not focused on because we focus on his insane ability for grip. But trust me, Verstappen is analytical too. Last thing I would like to say is that if Russell and Verstappen were in the same car, there might be slight differences based on their driving style. Maybe Verstappen's car would be a little bit more pointed, but they would both have the same balance and consistency in tires and grips. And then you would see that Verstappen would also have consistent performances, even if he has a different driving style, and would adapt in FP1 very quickly, just like Russell does. Except for Russell's doing it in an analytical way, Verstappen's doing it a field way. But once he has a stable car, he's going to be able to maximize grip and everything else, and not having to worry about giving feedback to the mechanics to try to find out where his car is going. And also, if he has a car that's not pointed or a car that's just like Russell's, he's going to adapt his driving style to it intuitively and might just be driving consistently. I have to think about this because he's still going to change his driving style from track to track to track, but those would be adaptations to the conditions of those tracks. So what would happen is that he's going to be more dangerous now if he has a stable car, a car that he now doesn't have to use some of the pointed asymmetrical way he drives in the imbalanced RB21. So he has a stable car. So that now his adaptations now are purely about where is the grip. It's not about trying to manage the oversteer and understeer. And then you would see that he's being consistent, just like Russell. Not consistent in how fast you go, but consistent in extracting the most of the car for each free practice through qualifying and everything else. And then it might be the case that he might even do better against Russell in qualifying in the same car than he's doing it with the Red Bull, which had certain problems, even though it was ultimately faster than Russell's car. So all of this is, we still have to go week to week to figure this out because there's a lot for me to try to handle in 10 minutes. But the idea is that the strength that Russell has is his analytical ability, his ability to be consistent overall, and his temperament, which doesn't go up and down. Verstappen, a little bit volatile, but it's getting better. Verstappen, is getting better at adapting his driving style as he gets older to know that you don't always have to use a V line. He uses a modified V or in high speed corners. So he's adapting too. So once again, I'm going to give, just like when you had Prost versus Senna, more times than not, Senna would win the championship, but sometimes Prost would. I think that's what you would be getting. Or like Hamilton versus Rosberg. Rosberg did beat Hamilton in the same machinery 1 year out of 7. I think if Verstappen and Russell drove 8 years in a row, I actually think Russell might get 2 or 3 to 5, which is better than what Rosberg could get because of his extreme analytical ability. And once again, extracting the most out of the car, given his driving style consistently. You see what I'm saying? Consistently on average, he does. Verstappen has peaks where he's going to do better and get the more out of his car, given his driving style, than Russell would. But Russell is consistent with it, as we saw up and down. But a lot of the up and down for Verstappen might have been due to the erratic nature of the car. The real question is, does he need a car that's erratic to drive well, given his driving style? Well, I'll tell you what, guys, that's going to remain a mystery.